My grandkids ignored me until they needed money. So I started a No-Handouts scholarship in my cat's name. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson. I'm 72 years old. And I live in a cozy 2-bedroom ranch house in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where I've spent the last 15 years of retirement tending to my garden and watching the seasons change through my kitchen window. This is the story of how my own grandchildren pushed me too far, and how I finally taught them a lesson they'd never forget, starting when they only remembered I existed the moment they needed a check for college, treating me like their personal ATM instead of the grandmother who had loved them unconditionally for their entire lives. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before all this happened. For 23 years, I worked as a head librarian at Cedar Falls Public Library, a job that taught me patience, organization, and the value of quiet observation. My late husband Frank and I raised 2 children, my daughter Patricia and my son Michael, in a home filled with Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, and the kind of steady love that builds strong foundations. When Frank passed away 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I thought my world had ended. We'd planned to travel together in retirement, maybe visit those national parks we'd always talked about. Instead, I found myself alone in a house that suddenly felt too big, with too many memories echoing off the walls. But I wasn't completely alone. I had my grandchildren, Patricia's kids Logan and Tessa, and Michael's son Garrett. And they had been the light of my life since the day each of them was born. More importantly, I had Frank's pension, my librarian's retirement fund, and the life insurance money that meant I could be the grandmother I'd always dreamed of being. Generous, supportive, and always there when they needed me. And then there was Mr. Whiskers. I'd never been much of a cat person until 3 years ago, when a scraggly orange tabby showed up on my back porch during one of Iowa's brutal winter storms. He was thin, bedraggled, and missing the tip of his left ear. Clearly a fighter who'd seen some hard times. I brought him inside just for the night, or so I told myself. 3 years later, Mr. Whiskers had transformed from a half-wild stray into a magnificent plump gentleman with the most expressive green eyes I'd ever seen. He had opinions about everything. My choice of breakfast, the temperature of the house, which chair I should sit in while reading, and he wasn't shy about expressing them with a repertoire of meows, chirps, and pointed stares that somehow conveyed exactly what he was thinking. While my grandchildren grew distant, Mr. Whiskers grew closer. He slept curled against my hip every night, followed me from room to room during the day, and somehow always knew when I was feeling particularly lonely. When I cried over old photo albums, he'd climb into my lap and purr until the tears stopped. When I celebrated small victories, like finally figuring out how to use Netflix or successfully growing tomatoes in my backyard garden, he'd sit beside me with what I swear was a proud expression on his whiskered face. But let me back up and tell you about the grandchildren who used to mean everything to me. Logan was 22 now, Patricia's eldest, and had always been what people called a handful. Even as a toddler, he had a charm that could get him out of trouble, and a smile that could melt your heart. I used to keep a special jar of his favorite cookies on my kitchen counter, and every Tuesday after school, he'd bound through my front, Dr. calling, "Grandma Dot, what's for snack today?" I spent countless Saturday afternoons teaching him to play chess on Frank's old wooden board, watching him grow from a boy who moved pieces randomly to a young man who could actually beat me. Occasionally, when he wanted to join Little League, I bought his first glove and attended every single game, even the ones in pouring rain. When he decided he wanted to learn guitar in middle school, I surprised him with a beautiful acoustic Yamaha for his 13th birthday. Not because his parents couldn't afford it, but because I wanted to be the one to nurture his dreams. Tessa was 20 now, Logan's younger sister, and she had always been my little artist. From the time she could hold a crayon, she was drawing me pictures that I'd proudly display on my refrigerator. We spent hours together at my kitchen table, working on art projects with supplies I'd bought just for our visits. Watercolors, colored, pencils, construction paper, glitter. My guest bedroom closet looked like an art store had exploded in it. When she was in high school and expressed interest in photography, I bought her a professional-grade camera for Christmas. Not one of those cheap beginner models, but a real Canon DSLR with multiple lenses and a carrying case. The look of pure joy on her face when she opened that box was worth every penny of the $800 it cost me. Garrett was 18, Michael's boy, and had always been my little scholar. Even as a child, he preferred books to toys, and I encouraged that love of learning with everything I had. Every birthday and Christmas brought him carefully selected books, educational games, and later, a laptop computer when he started high school. When he expressed interest in science, I set up a small laboratory in my basement with microscopes, chemistry sets, and all the materials a budding scientist could want. I wasn't just throwing money at these children. I was investing. In relationships, every gift came with time spent together, conversations about their interests, and my genuine enthusiasm for their passions. I attended school plays, science fairs, art shows, and graduation ceremonies. I was the grandmother who never missed a birthday, who always remembered their favorite foods, who kept photo albums full of their achievements and milestones. The change didn't happen overnight. It was so gradual that I almost didn't notice it at first. The way you don't notice your hair growing until one day you realize it's time for a trim. It started when Logan turned 16 and got his driver's license. Suddenly he was too busy to visit on Tuesdays. He had friends to see, places to go, a whole world that didn't include sitting in his grandmother's kitchen eating homemade snickerdoodles. I understood. Teenagers need independence. But the visits didn't just become less frequent. They became shorter, more distracted. When he did come by, he'd spend the whole time on his phone, giving me half-hearted responses to my questions about school, his friends, his plans for the future. Tessa went through a similar transformation around the same time. The girl who used to call me twice a week just to chat suddenly had nothing to say. Our art sessions became rushed affairs where she'd show up, work on a project with barely concealed impatience, and leave as soon as politely possible. The camera I'd bought her gathered dust on her bedroom shelf, replaced by an iPhone that seemed permanently attached to her hand. Garrett held out the longest, probably because he was the youngest, but even he began to drift away as high school pressures mounted. Our Saturday morning breakfast dates, a tradition we'd maintained for 3 years, started getting canceled more often than kept. "Sorry, Grandma, I've got a project due Monday." Or, "Sorry, I promised I'd hang out with friends today." I told myself this was normal. Kids grow up. They develop their own lives, their own interests, their own social circles. Frank had always said that successful parenting meant raising children who didn't need you anymore. And maybe that applied to grandparenting too. But deep down, it hurt more than I wanted to admit. The phone calls became sporadic, then rare, then non-existent unless I initiated them. Family dinners that used to be lively affairs with all of us gathered around my dining room table became awkward obligations, where everyone seemed to be counting the minutes until they could leave. Christmas and birthday gifts were received with polite thank yous but no real enthusiasm, as if they were going through the motions of gratitude. I found myself sending text messages that went unanswered for days. I'd leave voicemails that were never returned. I'd mail birthday cards with handwritten notes inside, wondering if they were even being read or just tossed aside with the rest of the junk mail. The loneliness was crushing, but I didn't want to be one of those clingy grandmothers who guilted their grandchildren into spending time with them. So I kept my hurt to myself and found comfort in the one relationship that remained consistent and loving: my bond with Mr. Whiskers. While my human family grew distant, Mr. Whiskers became my constant, devoted companion. Every morning he'd wake me up with gentle headbutts and purrs, as reliable as any alarm clock. While I had my coffee, he'd sit on the kitchen windowsill, narrating the neighborhood activities with a series of chirps and meows that I'd learned to interpret over the years. "Yes, Mr. Whiskers?" I'd say. "Mrs. Patterson is taking her dog for a walk again." "Yes, I see her." "No, you cannot go outside and chase the squirrels." He had a whole vocabulary of sounds, each with its own meaning. The short, questioning meow meant, "What's for breakfast?" The longer, more insistent yowl meant, "You've been reading too long. Pay attention to me." The soft, purring trill he made when I came home from errands meant, "I missed you, and I'm glad you're back." In the evenings, we'd settle into our routine. I'd sit in Frank's old recliner with a book or my knitting, and Mr. Whiskers would curl up in my lap, his purr providing a soothing soundtrack to whatever I was doing. Sometimes I'd read aloud to him. He seemed particularly fond of mystery novels, his ears perking up during the dramatic parts. "What do you think, Mr. Whiskers?" I'd ask during a particularly puzzling plot twist. Did the butler really do it, or is it too obvious? He'd respond with a thoughtful meow that I chose to interpret as literary criticism. When I was sad, and I was sad more often than I cared to admit during those lonely months, he seemed to sense it immediately. He'd abandon whatever he was doing to come to me, climbing into my lap if I was sitting or rubbing against my legs if I was standing. His presence was more comforting than any words could have been. I started talking to him more and more, sharing thoughts and feelings I had no one else to share with. I told him about my day at the grocery store, about the book I was reading, about memories of Frank and the children when they were young. He listened with the kind of attention my grandchildren used to give me, but no longer seemed capable of. "You know what, Mr. Whiskers?" I said one particularly difficult evening after receiving another unanswered text from Tessa. "You're better company than most people. At least you're honest about what you want, and you never take my love for granted." He meowed in what I chose to interpret as agreement, then proceeded to knead my lap with his paws, his way of showing affection and claiming ownership of both me and the chair. For 2 years, I lived in this new reality of distant grandchildren and an increasingly close relationship with my cat. I'd started to accept that this was simply how things were going to be. The kids were busy with their own lives, and maybe that was for the best. I had Mr. Whiskers, my books, my garden, and a comfortable routine that, while lonely, was at least predictable. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, my phone started ringing again. It was Logan who called first, on a Tuesday evening in late February. I was so surprised to see his name on my caller ID that I almost didn't answer in time. "Grandma Dot." His voice was warm and enthusiastic, more animated than I'd heard it in months. "How are you doing? I've been thinking about you." My heart leaped. Maybe he'd finally realized how much our relationship meant to both of us. Maybe he was ready to rebuild the connection we'd lost. "Logan, how wonderful to hear from you." "I'm doing well, sweetie. How are your classes going?" "Oh, they're great. Really great. Listen, I was wondering, could we maybe get together for coffee this weekend? I'd love to catch up." I practically floated through the rest of the week, planning what I'd bake for his visit and thinking about all the things we could talk about. When Saturday arrived, I had fresh chocolate chip cookies cooling on the counter and his favorite coffee brewing in the pot. Logan arrived right on time, looking handsome and mature in a way that made my grandmother's heart swell with pride. For the first few minutes, it was like old times. He complimented my cookies, asked about Mr. Whiskers, who had wisely made himself scarce. He'd never particularly liked Logan, and even inquired about my garden plans for spring. Then, about 20 minutes into the visit, his tone shifted. "So, Grandma, I wanted to talk to you about something." You know I'm a junior now, right? And I've been thinking a lot about graduate school. My antenna went up. There was something in his voice, a practiced casualness that felt rehearsed. That's wonderful, Logan. What field are you considering? Well, I'm thinking about law school, actually. I know it's expensive, but I think I'd be really good at it. The thing is, the good schools are really competitive, and I want to make sure I can focus on my studies without worrying about money. He paused, giving me a meaningful look. I was hoping maybe you could help me out with tuition. I know you helped pay for my undergraduate degree, and I'm so grateful for that. Law school is it's a lot more expensive, but it would be such an investment in my future. There it was. The real reason for the sudden renewed interest in spending time with his grandmother. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. How much are we talking about, Logan? Well, the school I'm looking at is about $60,000 a year for 3 years. I know that sounds like a lot, but $180,000. I said it quietly, letting the number hang. In the air between us. Well, yes, but think of it as an investment. Once I'm a lawyer, I'll be able to pay you back. With interest. I studied my grandson's face. He was smiling, but it was the same charming smile he'd used as a child when he was trying to talk his way out of trouble. There was no acknowledgement of the fact that he'd barely spoken to me in 2 years. No recognition that he was asking me to fund a lifestyle I hadn't been invited to share. I'll need to think about it, I said finally. His smile faltered just slightly. Of course. Take all the time you need. I just wanted to put it on your radar. He left shortly after that, taking a container of cookies with him, but leaving behind a hollow feeling in my chest that took days to go away. Logan's visit was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, I heard from all 3 grandchildren. More than I'd heard from them in the previous 2 years combined. Tessa called 3 weeks later, her voice bright and bubbly in a way that immediately put me on guard. Grandma Dot, I hope you don't mind me calling so late. I just wanted to hear your voice. We chatted for a few minutes about inconsequential things before she got to the point. I have some exciting news. I got accepted into this amazing summer program in France. It's for art students, and it would be such an incredible opportunity. The only thing is, it's pretty expensive. About $15,000 for the 6-week program. I was wondering if maybe you'd consider it as an early graduation gift. $15,000 for a summer vacation disguised as education. That does sound like a wonderful opportunity, I said carefully. Tell me more about the program. She launched into an enthusiastic description that sounded more like a travel brochure than an academic curriculum. Museums, cafes, incredible cultural experiences, but very little about actual instruction or educational outcomes. I'll think about it, sweetheart, I said when she finished. Oh, thank you, Grandma. I knew you'd understand how important this is for my artistic development. Artistic development. Right. Garrett was the last to call, and his approach was slightly different. Instead of asking directly, he started by talking about his college plans. I got into State University, he announced, and I felt a genuine surge of pride and happiness for him. That's wonderful, Garrett. Your parents must be so proud. They are, but his voice trailed off, and I could practically hear him working up to something. The thing is, they're already stretching to pay for it, and I really want to focus on my studies instead of working part-time. I know you've always supported education, and I was wondering if you might be willing to help with some of the expenses. Not all of it. Just maybe room and board for the first year so I can get established. Room and board at State University. Another $12,000. I'm proud of you for getting accepted, Garrett, I said. Let me look into what that would involve. Thanks, Grandma. I really appreciate you even considering it. I promise I'll make you proud. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, Mr. Whiskers purring in my lap, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 2 months, my 3 grandchildren, who had collectively spent maybe 10 hours with me in the past 2 years, had contacted me requesting a total of over $200,000. Not one of them had asked how I was doing, really doing. Not one had inquired about my health, my loneliness, or whether I might need anything from them. The conversations had been entirely transactional, focused solely on what I could provide for them. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, while Mr. Whiskers slept peacefully beside me, and I came to a painful realization. To my grandchildren, I had become nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. The final straw came on a Thursday in early May. I was in my garden, planting the tomatoes I'd started from seed in my kitchen windowsill, when my phone buzzed with a text message from Logan. Hey, Grandma. Have you thought any more about the law school thing? I need to put down a deposit soon and wanted to see if I could count on your help. Let me know. Thanks. That was it. No, how are you? No, hope you're having a good day. Just a casual demand disguised as a question, sent via text message like I was his banker, rather than his grandmother. I sat, back on my heels in the dirt, holding my phone, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was anger. Clean, clarifying anger that burned away the confusion and self-doubt I'd been carrying. I walked back into the house, washed the soil from my hands, and did something I'd never done before. I called all 3 of my grandchildren and asked them to come to my house on Saturday afternoon for a family meeting. Is everything okay, Grandma? Tessa asked, and for a moment I heard genuine concern in her voice. Everything's fine, I assured her. I just want to discuss some things with all of you together. They all came, probably thinking they were going to receive good news about their respective financial requests. I'd spent Friday preparing, not cookies or coffee, but documentation. Bank statements, tuition costs, scholarship information, and a legal pad full of notes. They arrived within minutes of each other, and I wondered if they'd coordinated their timing. Logan looked confident, Tessa seemed excited, and Garrett appeared, nervous but hopeful. Thank you all for coming, I said, settling into my chair while they arranged themselves on my couch. Mr. Whiskers, perhaps sensing the tension in the room, made himself scarce. I wanted to talk to you about the requests you've each made recently. Logan, you've asked for $180,000 for law school. Tessa, you want $15,000 for a summer program in France. Garrett, you'd like $12,000. For room and board your freshman year. They nodded, exchanging glances. That's a total of $207,000, I continued. It's a significant amount of money, and I've given it a lot of thought. I could see the anticipation in their faces. Before I give you my decision, I'd like to ask you all a question. When was the last time any of you visited me just to spend time together? Not because you needed something, not because it was a holiday or birthday, but simply because you wanted to see your grandmother. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Logan shifted in his seat. Tessa looked down at her hands. Garrett's face flushed. I thought so, I said quietly. None of you can remember, because it's been years. Years since any of you seemed to care whether I was alive or dead, until suddenly you needed money for your dreams and ambitions. Grandma, that's not fair. Logan started, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. For over 20 years, I've been the grandmother who never missed a birthday, who attended every school play and graduation, who supported your interests and dreams with both my time and my money. When you were children, you couldn't wait to come to this house. You'd run through that front door calling my name, excited to tell me about your day, eager to spend time together. My voice was steady, but I could feel the emotion building behind it. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being your grandmother and became your ATM. You stopped calling unless you needed something. You stopped visiting unless you had to. You turned me into a resource to be tapped when convenient, rather than a person to be loved. That's not true, Tessa protested. We love you, Grandma. Do you? I asked. When was the last time you asked how I was feeling? When did you last spend more than an hour in this house? When did any of you show the slightest interest in my life, my health, my happiness? The silence was my answer. I've made my decision about your requests, I said. The answer is no, to all of them. The explosion was immediate and predictable. But, Grandma, you don't understand how important this is. Logan's charm had evaporated, replaced by something uglier. This is my future we're talking about. What else are you going to do with your money? Tessa demanded, her artistic temperament flaring. You're not exactly living it up here. Garrett was quieter but no less hurt. I thought you supported education. I thought you believed in investing in family. I do support education, I said calmly. And I do believe in investing in family. But I also believe in mutual respect. And I've learned the hard way that you can't buy love or genuine relationships. So what? You're just going to hoard your money like some bitter old woman? Logan's mask had completely slipped now, revealing the entitled young man beneath the charming exterior. No, I said. I'm going to use my money to help young people who understand the value of relationships and respect for their elders. Students who've shown genuine care for the people in their lives. What does that mean? Tessa asked suspiciously. It means I'm establishing a scholarship fund. A significant one. But it won't be for any of you. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I think it's time for you all to leave now. You have some growing up to do, and you'll need to figure out how to fund your dreams without treating people like banks. They left in various states of outrage and disbelief, slamming doors and making accusations. After they were gone, I sat in my quiet house with Mr. Whiskers purring in my lap, and for the first time in months, I felt peaceful. Well, Mr. Whiskers, I said, scratching behind his ears. I think it's time we did something that would make your old dad Frank proud, don't you? The next morning I called my lawyer, David Morrison, who had handled Frank's estate and my financial planning for years. David was about my age, recently retired from a large firm, but still took on clients like me who needed straightforward, honest legal advice. Dorothy, good to hear from you. What can I do for you today? David, I want to establish a scholarship fund. A substantial one. Can you walk me through what that would involve? Of course. That's a wonderful way to use your resources. How much are we talking about? And what kind of criteria do you have in mind? I'd been thinking about this all night, lying awake while Mr. Whiskers slept peacefully beside me. I want to endow it with $250,000 initially, with the possibility of adding more later. The interest and returns on that investment should fund several scholarships each year. David whistled softly. That's very generous, Dorothy. What kind of students do you want to help? Students who've demonstrated genuine care for elderly people in their community. Kids who volunteer at nursing homes, who help their grandparents, or elderly neighbors, who understand that older people are valuable human beings, rather than burdens to be tolerated. That's very specific, and very meaningful. What would you like to call this scholarship? I smiled, looking down at Mr. Whiskers, who was sitting in a patch of sunlight on my kitchen floor, methodically grooming his orange fur. The Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship. There was a pause. Mr. Whiskers? My cat, I explained. He's shown me more loyalty and affection in the past 3 years than my own grandchildren have. It seems fitting. To his credit, David didn't question. My choice. The Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship it is. I'll draw up the paperwork and we can establish it through the Community Foundation. They'll handle the administration and selection process. Perfect. And David? I want this to be well publicized. I want people to know that there are substantial scholarships available for young people who treat their elders with respect and kindness. Consider it done. Over the next few weeks, I worked with David and the Cedar Falls Community Foundation to establish the scholarship program. The process was more involved than I'd expected, but also more rewarding. Jennifer Walsh, the foundation's program director, was the enthusiastic woman in her 40s who immediately understood what I was trying to accomplish. This is such a unique and needed scholarship opportunity, she told me during one of our planning meetings. We see so many awards for academic achievement or athletic prowess, but recognizing young people who showed genuine compassion for elderly community members, it's brilliant. We developed comprehensive criteria for applicants. Students would need to submit essays about their experiences with elderly people, provide references from nursing homes or community organizations where they'd volunteered, and demonstrate consistent, long-term commitment to supporting seniors. Not just one-time volunteer projects designed to look good on college applications. I want to fund 4 scholarships per year, I told Jennifer. $2,000 each, renewable for up to 4 years if the students maintain their commitment to elder care and community service. That's incredibly generous. The fund you're establishing will be able to sustain that level of giving indefinitely, with room for growth. I also insisted on being involved in the selection process. I wanted to read the applications personally, to meet the finalists if possible, and to understand exactly who we were helping and why they deserve support. Many donors prefer to remain anonymous, Jennifer mentioned. But you're welcome to be as involved as you'd like. I want these young people to understand that real people believe in them and their values, I said. Anonymous gifts are wonderful, but I think there's value in knowing that someone cares enough to invest in your future because of the kind of person you are. The scholarship was announced in late August, just as the new school year was beginning. Jennifer had worked with high schools throughout the county to publicize the opportunity, and the response was overwhelming. We've received over 60 applications already, she told me during our October meeting. The essays are remarkable. Dorothy, these young people are doing incredible work in their communities. I spent hours reading through the applications, and what I found restored my faith in the younger generation. There was Marcus Rodriguez, who had spent 3 years volunteering at Sunset Manor Nursing Home, not just reading to residents, but learning their life stories and helping them record oral histories for their families. His essay about Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a 94-year-old former teacher who had shared her memories of teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, brought tears to my eyes. There was Samantha Chen, who had started a program pairing high school students with elderly neighbors for weekly visits and help with household tasks. She'd organized 30 teenagers to provide regular support for over 50 seniors in their community, creating genuine friendships across generational lines. James Washington had been caring for his grandmother with Alzheimer's disease while maintaining a 3.8 GPA and working part-time to help his family financially. His essay about the patience and love required to care for someone who no longer remembered his name was both heartbreaking and inspiring. And then there was Maria Santos, who had organized her church youth group to adopt the entire population of a local assisted living facility. Every resident had a teenage grandchild who visited regularly, brought homemade gifts, and treated the elderly residents like beloved family members. These kids understand something my own grandchildren never learned, I told Mr. Whiskers as I reviewed the applications. They know that elderly people aren't burdens. We're repositories of wisdom, experience, and love, if anyone bothers to look. He meowed his agreement and settled into my lap while I continued reading. Choosing the first 4 recipients was one of the most difficult and rewarding things I'd ever done. Every applicant deserved support, and I found myself wishing I could fund scholarships for all of them. Jennifer and I spent a full day interviewing the top candidates. I wanted to meet them face to face, to see the quality of character that their essays had suggested. Marcus Rodriguez was exactly what I'd hoped. To find a thoughtful, articulate young man who spoke about the elderly residents at Sunset Manor like they were his own family. When I asked him what he'd learned from his volunteer work, his answer made my heart sing. Mrs. Patterson taught me that every person has stories worth hearing, and Mr. Johnson showed me that dignity doesn't depend on physical ability. Mrs. Foster helped me understand that loneliness is one of the worst things that can happen to a person, but it's also one of the easiest things to fix if you just show up consistently. Samantha Chen had the kind of organized compassion that reminded me of myself at her age. She'd created detailed schedules, training materials for volunteers, and emergency contact systems. But she'd also formed genuine friendships with the elderly people in her program. My volunteer, Mrs. Kim, taught me to knit, she told me with a smile. Now I make scarves for all the seniors in our program every Christmas. But more than that, she taught me about resilience. She came to America with nothing and built a whole life through sheer determination. James Washington spoke about his grandmother with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. People say it's sad that she doesn't remember me anymore, but I think they're wrong. Every day I get to meet my grandmother again for the first time. I get to see her discover that she has a grandson who loves her. It's not sad. It's a gift. Maria. Santos had the kind of infectious enthusiasm that reminded me why I'd become a librarian in the first place. The joy of connecting people with resources they needed, of building bridges between different worlds. Our adopted grandparents have taught our youth group more about faith and perseverance than any sermon ever could, she explained. Mr. Peterson lived through the Depression and World War II. Mrs. Kowalski survived cancer 3 times. These people know what it means to keep going when things get tough. By the end of the interview process, I knew I'd found exactly what I was looking for. Young people who understood that relationships with elderly people were sources of mutual enrichment, not charitable obligations. I wish my own grandchildren could meet these kids, I told Jennifer as we finished our deliberations. Maybe they'd learn something about what it means to value the people who came before you. The Community Foundation organized a scholarship awards ceremony in November, held in the auditorium of Cedar Falls High School. I'd been nervous about appearing in public. I'd lived quietly since Frank's death, avoiding attention and fanfare. But as I sat on the stage, looking out at an audience filled with families, community leaders, and the scholarship recipients themselves, I felt a sense of pride and purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Jennifer introduced me as the founder of the Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship, and I stood up to address the crowd. I'd prepared remarks, but looking at those 4 remarkable young people sitting in the front row, I decided to speak from my heart instead. When I established this scholarship, I named it after my cat, because he's taught me something important about loyalty and unconditional love. Mr. Whiskers doesn't care. If I'm having a bad hair day, or if I'm worried about my arthritis, he doesn't call me only when he needs something or ignore me when I'm inconvenient. He simply loves me, consistently and without conditions. I could see some confused faces in the audience, probably wondering why this elderly woman was talking about her cat at a scholarship ceremony. These 4 young people understand what Mr. Whiskers knows instinctively, that love and respect aren't transactional. They don't volunteer with elderly people because they want something in return. They do it because they recognize the inherent value and dignity of every human being, regardless of age. I looked directly at Marcus, Samantha, James, and Maria. You four have chosen to build relationships with elderly people in your community, and in doing so, you've enriched not only their lives, but your own. You've learned patience, gained wisdom, and developed the kind of character that will serve you well throughout your lives. The applause was warm and sustained, but more importantly, I could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the audience. This wasn't just about money. It was about values. After the ceremony, I was approached by several people who wanted to know more about the scholarship criteria. A high school guidance counselor asked if she could use our requirements as inspiration for community service projects. A nursing home administrator wanted to partner with us to create more volunteer opportunities for teenagers. But the most meaningful moment came when Marcus Rodriguez's grandmother, a tiny woman with bright eyes and a warm smile, approached me, with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said, gripping my hands with surprising strength. "Marcus tells me about the scholarship. But more than that, he tells me about you. You understand what it means to be forgotten by your own family. Thank you for seeing the good in him when his own parents sometimes don't." I realized then that this scholarship wasn't just helping deserving students. It was creating a community of people who understood the value of intergenerational relationships. Word travels fast in a town like Cedar Falls, especially when it involves a $250,000 scholarship fund named after a cat. Within a week of the award ceremony, all 3 of my grandchildren had heard about the Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship. Logan called first, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Grandma, I just heard about your scholarship thing. Are you seriously telling me you gave away money to complete strangers instead of helping your own family?" "I invested in young people who understand the value of relationships," I replied calmly. "Something you might want to consider learning." "This is ridiculous. You're my grandmother. You're supposed to help me." "I'm supposed to love you, Logan." "Which I do. But I'm not supposed to enable your entitled behavior or fund your dreams while you treat me like an ATM." He hung up on me. Tessa's reaction came via a series of increasingly frantic text messages. "Grandma, I heard about the scholarship. Why didn't you tell us you were giving money away?" "We're your family. We should come first." "I can't believe you'd choose strangers over your own grandchildren." "This is so unfair." I responded with a single text. "The scholarship recipients earn my investment through their actions and character. When you're ready to discuss rebuilding our relationship based on mutual respect, rather than financial transactions, I'm here." She didn't respond. Garrett's approach was different, more manipulative and emotionally calculated. He showed up at my house unannounced on a Saturday afternoon, looking appropriately contrite and vulnerable. "Grandma, can we talk?" "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I let him in, though Mr. Whiskers gave him a distinctly unfriendly look before retreating to his favorite sunny spot by the window. "I want you to know that I never meant to make you feel used," Garrett began, settling onto my couch with practiced humility. "I love you, and I'm sorry if I gave you the impression that I only care about money." It was a good performance. He'd always been the most emotionally intelligent of the 3. But I'd learned to recognize manipulation, even when it came wrapped in sincerity. "I appreciate you saying that, Garrett. When was the last time you visited me without wanting something?" He paused, clearly trying to remember, and I could see the exact moment he realized he couldn't come up with an answer. I know it's been a while, but I've been so busy with school and 2 years," I said quietly. "It's been 2 years since you spent time with me just because you wanted to. 2 years since you called to ask how I was doing, rather than to ask for something." His careful composure cracked slightly. "But I do care about you, Grandma. It's just, well, you're always fine. You don't seem to need anything from us." I needed you to care whether I was alive or dead, I said. I needed you to remember that I'm a person with feelings, not just a resource to be tapped when convenient. He left shortly after that, and I could see in his eyes that he finally understood what he'd lost. Not just the money, but the relationship. With a grandmother who had loved him unconditionally. The most unexpected consequence of establishing the scholarship was how it changed my own life in Cedar Falls. I'd been living quietly since Frank's death, keeping to myself and my small circle of activities. But the scholarship made me a visible part of the community in a way I hadn't anticipated. People began approaching me at the grocery store, at the post office, at the library where I still volunteered occasionally. They wanted to tell me about their own experiences with elderly relatives, to share stories of young people who were making a difference, to express appreciation for recognizing the value of intergenerational relationships. My daughter volunteers at Sunset Manor because of your scholarship. One woman told me while we were both selecting produce at the farmer's market. She didn't win the award, but applying for it made her realize how much she enjoyed spending time with the residents. She's planning to study gerontology now. A high school principal approached me at a community theater production to tell me that applications for elder care volunteer positions had tripled since the scholarship was announced. Your requirements created a blueprint for the kind of community service that actually builds character, he said. Even more meaningful were the thank you notes I began receiving from elderly residents at local nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Marcus Rodriguez had apparently started a trend among scholarship applicants of helping seniors write letters, and several of them had written to thank me for encouraging young people to see them as valuable human beings. "Dear Mrs. Henderson," wrote one gentleman named Robert Chen, "I am 89 years old and have been living at Sunset Manor for 3 years. Your scholarship girl Samantha visits me every Wednesday, and she has brought more joy into my life than I thought possible. She listens to my stories about the war and helps me write letters to my nephew in California. Thank you for teaching young people that old people have something to offer. I kept every single letter in a special box next to my reading chair, and I read them aloud to Mr. Whiskers when I was feeling particularly proud of what we'd accomplished." By the spring, the Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship had inspired similar programs in 3 neighboring communities. A retired teacher in Waterloo established the Friendship Bridge Scholarship for students who created connections between different age groups. A businessman in Dubuque funded the Generations Award for young people who demonstrated exceptional care for elderly family members. Jennifer from the Community Foundation called to tell me about the growing movement. "Dorothy, you've started something remarkable. We're getting calls from foundations across the Midwest, asking for information about how to establish similar programs." I was sitting in my garden when she called, watching Mr. Whiskers stalk a butterfly among my tomato plants. The sight of his focused concentration made me smile. He never caught the butterflies, but he never stopped trying, and he seemed to enjoy the chase as much as the hypothetical capture. "It's not about the money, Jennifer," I told her. "It's about recognizing that relationships require investment from both sides. These young people understand that elderly people aren't just recipients of charity. We're partners in relationships that benefit everyone involved." The scholarship recipients from last year are already applying to be mentors for this year's applicants, she told me. Marcus Rodriguez has organized a group of previous winners to help other students develop volunteer programs in their communities. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Maria Santos, one of the first scholarship recipients, knocked on my door with a small bouquet of flowers from her mother's garden. "Mrs. Henderson, I wanted to thank you in person," she said, settling into my living room with the easy comfort of someone who understood how to visit with elderly people. "The scholarship money helped me pay for college. But more than that, you taught me that what I was doing with our adopted grandparents was valuable and important." She told me about her college major, social work with a focus on aging services, and Her plans to create intergenerational programs after graduation. You know what the best part is? She asked as she prepared to leave. My adopted grandmother, Mrs. Kowalski, is teaching me to make her famous pierogi recipe. She says she's been waiting 70 years for someone to care enough to learn it properly. After Maria left, I sat in my quiet house with Mr. Whiskers purring in my lap, thinking about the chain reaction that had started with my hurt feelings and a cat's unconditional love. 6 months after the scholarship award ceremony, I received a letter. That surprised me more than anything else in this entire story. It was from Logan, handwritten on actual stationery rather than sent as a text or email. Dear Grandma Dot, it began, and I could tell immediately that something had changed in his tone. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last spring, and I realize I owe you an apology. Not because I want anything from you, but because I finally understood what you were trying to tell me. I didn't get into the law school I wanted. Turns out my grades weren't quite as impressive as I thought they were, and I had to take a year off to work and reapply. I got a job at a retirement community here in Des Moines, doing maintenance and helping with activities. Working there has taught me things I never learned in college. I've met people who survived the Depression, who fought in wars, who built businesses from nothing, who raised families under circumstances I can't imagine. They have stories that are more interesting than any textbook, and wisdom that comes from actually living through challenges rather than just reading about them. There's a woman here named Mrs. Anderson who reminds me of you. She's smart and funny and has this way of seeing right through people's nonsense. She told me about her grandson who never visits, and it made me realize what I did to you. What we all did to you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand why you established the scholarship, and why you named it after Mr. Whiskers. Sometimes the people who love us most consistently are the ones we take for granted. I hope you're well, and I hope Mr. Whiskers is still ruling the house with his furry iron fist. Love, Logan, P.S. I'm planning to apply for a different program next year. A master's in gerontology. Turns out I'm good at working with elderly people, and I find it much more rewarding than I ever expected. I read the letter 3 times, then called Mr. Whiskers over to hear it read aloud. He listened with his usual attention, then meowed what I chose to interpret as approval. 2 weeks later, Logan called to ask if he could visit. Not to ask for anything, but simply to see me and meet Mr. Whiskers properly. It was the first genuine conversation we'd had in years, and while it didn't erase the hurt of the previous years, it felt like the beginning of something new. I'd like that, I told him. But I should warn you, Mr. Whiskers is an excellent judge of character. He'll know if you're being sincere. Logan laughed, and for the first time in years, it sounded like the boy I remembered from his childhood. I'll take my chances. The second year of the Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship was even more successful than the first. We received over 90 applications, and the quality of the programs and relationships these young people were building was extraordinary. One applicant, a young man named David Kim, had started a technology program teaching elderly residents how to use tablets and smartphones to stay connected with distant family members. Another, Ashley Johnson, had organized a cooking program where teenagers learned traditional recipes from elderly community members, while providing them with company and assistance. But the application that moved me most came from a girl named Rebecca Martinez, whose essay began, "My great-grandmother has Alzheimer's disease, and most people think that means she's lost. But I've learned that she's not lost. She's just traveling through time differently than the rest of us." Rebecca had spent 2 years learning to communicate with her great-grandmother through music, discovering that while words might be forgotten, melodies and rhythms could still reach the parts of her mind that remained vibrant and alive. "When I sing the songs she taught me when I was little," She remembers being young, Rebecca wrote. When I play the music from her wedding, she remembers being in love. I can't bring back her memories of yesterday, but I can help her access her memories of forever. Reading these applications, I realized that the scholarship had accomplished something beyond my original intentions. It wasn't just recognizing young people who cared about elderly people. It was creating a generation of future leaders who understood that every stage of life has value and dignity. At the second awards ceremony, I spoke about the ripple effects of kindness and respect. When young people invest in relationships with elderly people, they're not just improving the lives of seniors, I told the audience. They're learning patience, gaining wisdom, and developing the kind of character that will make them better. Parents, better leaders, and better members of their communities. After the ceremony, I was approached by a journalist from the Des Moines Register who wanted to write a feature story about the scholarship. I agreed, thinking it might inspire similar programs in other areas. The article was published on a Sunday, morning in March, with a photo of me sitting in my garden with Mr. Whiskers on my lap. The headline read, "The cat who inspired a movement, how one grandmother's heartbreak became a community's healing." The reporter had captured not just the facts of the scholarship program, but the emotional journey that had led to its creation. She'd interviewed several of the scholarship recipients, nursing home administrators, and community leaders who had been impacted by the program. But the part of the article that meant the most to me was a sidebar that featured quotes from the thank you letters I'd received from elderly residents. Their words, in print, showed the world what I'd been trying to communicate all along. That elderly people aren't burdens to be managed, but treasures to be valued. The newspaper article had consequences I never could have anticipated. 3 days after it was published, I received a call from Tessa. "Grandma," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I read the article about you and the scholarship. I need to come see you. Can I drive down this weekend?" She arrived on Saturday morning, looking older and more thoughtful than I remembered. She'd brought a small gift, a framed photograph she'd taken of an elderly woman's hands, weathered and beautiful, holding a flower. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, settling into my living room with the careful politeness of someone who wasn't sure of her welcome, about how we treated you like an ATM instead of a person. Mr. Whiskers, who had been suspicious of my grandchildren for years, surprised me by approaching Tessa cautiously and allowing her to pet him. "I think he remembers me," she said softly, scratching behind his ears. "I used to try to include him in my art projects when I was little. You always said he was a good model because he sat still. He's become quite the art critic," I told her. "He has opinions about everything I read and watch." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us watching Mr. Whiskers enjoy his attention. "I got a job," Tessa said finally, "at an art therapy program for people with dementia. I didn't plan it. I just needed work after college, and it was the only position available. But it's changed everything I thought I knew about art and memory and what it means to be human." She told me about her clients, elderly people, who could no longer remember their own names but could still create beautiful, meaningful art. About a woman who painted the same blue door every day, trying to find her way home through her brushstrokes. About a man who sculpted tiny birds from clay, each one perfect, each one a message from a mind that was still creative and alive, despite the disease that was stealing his words. "I understand now why you named the scholarship after Mr. Whiskers," she said. "It's not about the money. It's about recognizing that love and loyalty matter more than anything else. And I realized that I stopped showing you both of those things a long time ago." She stayed for the whole weekend, helping me in the garden, cooking dinner together, and talking about art and memory and the ways that people connect across generations. When she left, she hugged me tightly and promised to call every week. "Not because I need anything," she said, "but because I want to know how you're doing, because I want to be part of your life again." As the scholarship program entered its third year, I found myself busier and more fulfilled than I'd been since Frank's death. In addition to reviewing applications and selecting recipients, I'd been invited to speak at conferences about intergenerational programming, to consult with other communities interested in establishing similar scholarships, and to serve on the board of the Regional Area Agency on Aging. The scholarship had grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. Corporate sponsors had joined the program, allowing us to fund 8 scholarships per year instead of 4. High schools throughout the state were incorporating elder care volunteer requirements into their community service programs. The Iowa Department of Education had created a curriculum guide based on our scholarship criteria. But the most meaningful development was personal. All 3 of my grandchildren had, in their own ways and at their own pace, begun to rebuild relationships with me based on mutual respect rather than financial transactions. Logan had completed his master's degree in gerontology and was working as a program coordinator at a senior center in Des Moines. He visited every other month, bringing stories from his work and asking for advice about programming and client relationships. Tessa had completed additional training in art therapy and was developing innovative programs for elderly people with cognitive impairments. She'd started sending me photographs of her clients' artwork, along with the stories behind each piece. Garrett had decided to pursue a career in medicine, specializing in geriatrics. He'd spent a summer volunteering at Sunset Manor, the same nursing home where Marcus Rodriguez had started his journey, and had discovered a passion for caring for elderly patients. "You know what I learned, Grandma?" he told me during one of his visits. "Old people aren't just young people who got old. They're people who have accumulated decades of experience, wisdom, and perspective. Taking care of them isn't charity. It's an honor." The scholarship recipients had also become an extended part of my family. They sent me updates about their college experiences, their career plans, and their continued involvement with elderly people in their communities. Several had started their own volunteer programs, creating a network of young people throughout the state who understood the value of intergenerational relationships. Marcus Rodriguez had graduated from college and was working as a social worker, specializing in aging services. He'd gotten engaged to a young woman he'd met through his volunteer work. She was a nursing student who'd been inspired by his example to focus on geriatric care. Maria Santos had completed her degree in social work and was developing intergenerational programming for a large nonprofit organization. She'd also adopted 2 elderly cats from the local shelter, telling me that they reminded her of the importance of providing love and care for those who might otherwise be forgotten. 5 years after I'd established the Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship, I received an invitation that brought everything full circle. The Cedar Falls Senior Center was hosting a community appreciation dinner, and they wanted to honor me for my contributions to improving the lives of elderly people in our area. I almost declined. I'd never been comfortable with public recognition, and the attention made me nervous. But Jennifer from the Community Foundation convinced me that the event was about more than honoring me. "This is about celebrating the community you've helped create," she told me. "The young people who've been inspired by your example, the elderly, people who've benefited from their service, and the families who've learned to value intergenerational relationships." The dinner was held in the high school gymnasium, decorated with photographs of scholarship recipients and the elderly people they'd served. There were over 300 people in attendance, a remarkable turnout for a town the size of Cedar Falls. But the most meaningful part of the evening was the presentation made by the current scholarship recipients. They'd created a video documentary about the program, featuring interviews with previous winners, elderly people who'd been helped by the volunteers, and community leaders who'd been inspired to create their own intergenerational programs. The video opened with a shot of me sitting in my garden with Mr. Whiskers, and then transitioned to interviews with Marcus, Maria, and the other scholarship recipients from the first year. They talked about how the scholarship had changed their career paths, their understanding of aging, and their appreciation for the wisdom of elderly people. But the most powerful segment featured elderly residents from local nursing homes and assisted living facilities, talking about the young volunteers who had enriched their lives. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, now 97 and still sharp as a tack, spoke directly to the camera. Dorothy Henderson understood something that too many people forget, that old people aren't just waiting to die. We are still living, still learning, still capable of love and friendship and joy. The young people who volunteer with us aren't doing us a favor. They're receiving a gift. They're learning from people who have lived through depression and war, and loss and triumph. They're gaining wisdom that can't be found in any textbook. The video concluded with a montage of photographs showing scholarship recipients with their elderly friends, laughing together, working on projects, celebrating holidays, and simply enjoying each other's company. The final image was of Mr. Whiskers, sitting regally in his favorite sunny spot, with a caption that read, "In honor of Mr. Whiskers, who taught us that love and loyalty are the greatest gifts we can give each other." When the video ended, the entire gymnasium erupted in applause. I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for the community of caring people who had grown up around a simple idea: that elderly people deserve respect, love, and genuine relationships. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium looking out at faces both familiar and new. In the front row sat Logan, Tessa, and Garrett, all of whom had driven to Cedar Falls to attend the dinner. Behind them were the scholarship recipients from all 5 years of the program, many of whom had brought their elderly friends as their guests. When I established the Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship 5 years ago, I began, I was a lonely, hurt grandmother who felt like she'd been reduced to nothing more than a bank account by the people she loved most. I was angry, and I wanted to do something that would matter. I paused, looking down at the front row where my grandchildren sat. Logan gave me an encouraging nod. I never expected that my hurt feelings and my cat's unconditional love would inspire a movement that would change so many lives, including my own. This scholarship program has taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is invest in values rather than individuals, in character rather than convenience. I talked about the transformation I'd witnessed in the young people who had received scholarships, the joy I'd seen in elderly residents who had gained new friends, and the healing that had occurred in my own family as we learned to value relationships over transactions. But most importantly, I concluded, this program has shown me that every generation has something valuable to offer the others. Young people bring energy, enthusiasm, and fresh perspectives. Elderly people bring wisdom, experience, and the long view of life that comes from having lived through multiple seasons of joy and sorrow. I looked directly at the scholarship recipients scattered throughout the audience. You young people have learned that elderly people aren't just repositories of the past. We're active participants in the present, with contributions to make and love to give. And you've taught us that the younger generation isn't just interested in technology and trends. You're capable of deep compassion and meaningful relationships. The applause was warm and sustained, but what meant the most to me were the individual responses I received afterward. Marcus Rodriguez, now a successful social worker, told me that the scholarship had changed not just his career path, but his entire understanding of what it meant to serve others. Maria Santos, working with intergenerational programs throughout the state, said that she thought of me every time she saw a young volunteer reading to an elderly resident. But the most touching moment came when Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, now using a walker but still determined to attend the dinner, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Dorothy," she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "You gave me back my purpose. When Marcus started visiting me 5 years ago, I thought I was just a charity case, someone to be pitied and humored. But he made me realize that my stories matter, that my experiences have value, that I still have something to contribute to the world." She paused, looking around the crowded gymnasium filled with people of all ages talking and laughing together. "You created something beautiful here. You turned your pain into purpose, and you've made all of our lives richer." As I write this story, the Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship is now in its 8th year. We've awarded over 60 scholarships to young people who understand that elderly people are valuable, worthy of respect, and capable of meaningful relationships. The program has been replicated in over 20 communities across the Midwest, and I've been invited to speak at conferences in 12 states about the importance of intergenerational programming. But the real legacy isn't in the numbers or the recognition. It's in the relationships that have been built and the lives that have been changed. Logan is now the director of a senior center in Des Moines, where he's created innovative programs that bring together elderly residents and young volunteers. He visits me every month, and we've developed the kind of adult relationship I'd always hoped for. One based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation or financial expectation. Tessa has become a nationally recognized expert in art therapy for people with dementia. She's published research, developed training programs, and created art installations that celebrate the creativity and dignity of elderly people with cognitive impairments. She calls me every week, and we talk about art and memory and the ways that creativity can bridge the gaps between different stages of life. Garrett is completing his medical residency in geriatrics at a prestigious hospital in Chicago. He's passionate about changing the way elderly people are treated in medical settings, advocating for approaches that recognize their full humanity, rather than just their medical conditions. He sends me updates about his research and asks for my input on patient care protocols. The scholarship recipients have gone on to careers in social work, nursing, medicine, education, and nonprofit management. They've created programs, influenced policies, and changed the way their communities think about aging and intergenerational relationships. But perhaps most importantly, they've learned that elderly people aren't just recipients of care. We're partners in relationships that benefit everyone involved. Mr. Whiskers, now 11 years old and still ruling my household with his feline wisdom, has become something of a celebrity in Cedar Falls. He receives fan mail from scholarship applicants, has been featured in several newspaper articles, and even has his own social media account, managed by one of the scholarship recipients, though he remains appropriately aloof about his fame. Every morning he still wakes me up with gentle headbutts and purrs. Every evening he still curls up in my lap while I read or watch television. He still has opinions about everything I do, and he still provides the kind of unconditional love that makes every day brighter. "You know, Mr. Whiskers," I told him, just last week as we sat in our favorite sunny spot by the kitchen window, "you've turned out to be quite the philanthropist. Who would have thought that a scraggly stray cat would inspire a scholarship program that's changed so many lives?" He responded with his typical dignified meow, which I chose to interpret as modest acceptance of his role in creating something meaningful. The truth is, I'm not the same woman who sat in her garden 5 years ago, hurt and angry about being treated like an ATM by her own grandchildren. I'm busier, more fulfilled, and more connected to my community than I've been since Frank's death. I've learned that the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's creating something so positive and meaningful that it transforms not just your own life, but the lives of everyone it touches. My grandchildren learned that relationships can't be bought or taken for granted, and that elderly people deserve respect and genuine affection. The scholarship recipients learned that serving others isn't a burden, but a privilege, and that elderly people have wisdom and experiences that can enrich their own lives. The elderly people in our community learned that they're valued and appreciated, not just tolerated or pitied. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is invest in values, rather than individuals, in character, rather than convenience, and in love, rather than transactions. The Mr. Whiskers Honor Scholarship will continue long after I'm gone, thanks to the endowment I've established and the community of supporters who have joined the cause. Future generations of young people will have the opportunity to learn what my grandchildren learned. That elderly people are treasures to be valued, not burdens to be endured. And somewhere in Cedar Falls, there will always be a cat named Mr. Whiskers, the current one, or perhaps a successor, who understands that love isn't complicated. It's simply about showing up consistently, offering comfort when it's needed, and never taking the people you care about for granted. That's the kind of lesson that's worth every penny of a $250,000 scholarship fund. And that, as they say, was that. Sometimes you have to show people you're not to be trifled with. What do you think? Did they get what they deserved? Or would you have handled it differently? I'd love to read your opinions in the comments below. Have you ever had to teach a lesson to someone who took you for granted? Share your story if you feel comfortable. If you enjoyed seeing these folks get their comeuppance and want more stories of well-deserved revenge, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and click the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for listening, and remember to stand up for yourselves.